Hi, and welcome to GCs in the House, a podcast spotlighting general counsels. I'm your host, Lena Guo. In my conversations with GCs, we discuss how they got in the top legal seat, obstacles that they had to overcome along the way, and how they are tackling new challenges. Hi, and thanks for joining. Today, I'm speaking with Matt Campobasso, General Counsel at Infusion, an investment management platform company based in Chicago, Illinois. After graduating with his JD from the University of Illinois Chicago School of Law, Matt began his legal career in public service. He then joined Freeborn & Peters, practicing as a litigator before going in-house, first to Elevate Services, then to Truqua, and finally to Infusion. Matt walks me through his career from government to private practice and how he came to be Infusion's general counsel. We also talk about what it's like to help a company scale and go through the IPO process, as well as what, in Matt's mind, makes for a great lawyer. Now, on to the conversation. Hi, Matt. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to have this chat.
Likewise, thanks for joining me today. It's been really nice getting to know you, and I'm excited to have the audience learn a little bit about your story. You are currently general counsel of Infusion. It's a publicly traded fintech company that provides investment management software to asset managers. And you've had an 18 plus year career. You've been a government attorney, a law firm partner, and you've been general counsel of private and publicly traded companies. So that's quite the resume. So where did you grow up, and how did you end up deciding to become a lawyer in the first place?
Yeah, when I hear you kind of put all that together, it's a little bit like, wait, me? That's, it's just life. You take it a day at a time, but you look back and you're like, wow, it has been kind of a journey. To your question, I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. For anyone listening who's familiar with Chicago and in the suburbs, I grew up in DuPage County. I lived there until I went off to college. And yeah, I have a mom and a dad, and I have two younger brothers, one of which is also a lawyer. The other is a motorcycle mechanic. So he was the smart one of the three of us. He went and did something that he really loved. But yeah, I think for me, the decision to be a lawyer, and it's funny, I've met so many lawyers in my career, and some were like, I came out of the womb ready to go practice. Others are like, I kind of fell backwards into it, or, face first into it. For me, growing up, my uncle, my uncle by marriage, my dad's sister's husband, he is an attorney. He's all but retired right now, but he was such an important presence for me in my life growing up. He is just a very gregarious, kind person. He's very charming. And he is also my godfather. And so growing up, talking to my uncle about his job, and he would explain to me what a lawyer did. And he was the general counsel of the Chicago Automotive Club for many years. And I just thought, like, this guy's really cool, and he's smart, and he seems like he loves what he does. And so, over the course of my childhood and even into my teens, like, I would have conversations with him, and in my life, when I thought about what do I want to do, it kept coming back to law school. And, one of the great things about law school, for me, at least when I was considering it, was all the different things that lawyers go on to do, right? Politics, some are like professional sports, coaches and managers. They do everything, speechwriters. And then obviously your more traditional lawyers who practice in many of the ways I have. But when I was in school, I went to University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. And when I was in school, I would go to like meetings on campus about pre-law, and I never jumped fully into it, but it was always something I kept coming back to. But the one thing that I think kept me away from it for a bit was, some people I would talk to and say, hey, I'm thinking about law school. And they'd say, there's too many lawyers in the world already. And, when you're like 17, 18, 19, hearing that is like, oh, okay. And then I remember talking to my uncle, and he said, you know what, there are a lot of lawyers, but there's not enough good ones. And to me, that was like a light bulb moment where I was like, okay, you know what, there's a lot of everything, right? There's a lot of chefs, and there's a lot of police officers, there's a lot of doctors, but if I find something that is interesting to me and I can go be good at it, which I just kind of know myself as someone who doesn't settle. Why not go and do it and make the most of it? So yeah, I took a couple years after I graduated from college and I worked. And then I took the LSAT and I went to law school in 2003.
It's always great to have. It sounds like your uncle was somewhat of a mentor, and it sounds like early on in your life, he was able to really help you provide light the way and provide some guidance in your career, which is great because I do remember you're mentioning you were really great with numbers and you almost became an accountant instead. Is that right?
Yeah, I had a lot of success with math, and especially in elementary school and into high school. Um, as I think I told you, I remember in grade school at one point, a teacher in an advanced class just handed me a textbook and said, "Look, I really can't teach you anything that you don't know, so why don't you just work at your own pace?" Which, as a lazy 13-year-old in seventh grade, I didn't do much work at all, and I still got an A, which, in hindsight, probably not great for my education, but at the time, I thought it was the best. But yeah, I mean, my whole life, people were like, wow, you're great with numbers, you understand math. And I just thought, oh, math, accounting. And so actually started my college career. I ended it in Champaign-Urbana, but I actually started it at DePaul University in Chicago. And I went there to be, you know, in their economics, business, accounting program. And I think I took two classes. They may have been the first two college classes I ever took. And I think I had like back to back on a Monday morning, my first week of college. And by the end of the second hour, I thought, there's just no way I can be an accountant or do anything having anything to do with this. And that's not I don't mean that to be disrespectful to people who are accountants, but it was interesting to me early on. And it didn't occur to me in these terms, but I thought, you know what, like just because you're good at something or something comes easily doesn't mean it's the right thing for you. And it doesn't mean it's going to make you happy. And actually, if we talk more about my career journey as a lawyer, that is something that I've actually looked back on, and that's kind of lit the way for me as I've made decisions about transitioning from, as you mentioned, government lawyer to law firm attorney to in-house lawyer.
Hmm. And so tell us a little bit more about those transitions. What made you go from government to law firm and eventually to a career in-house?
So in law school, everybody goes into, maybe not everybody, most people go into law school thinking, all right, I need to land, a summer internship at a huge firm and pull that crazy paycheck to go to Cubs games and out to eat. Um, I got good grades in law school, like better than average, but I wasn't our valedictorian and I wasn't, law firms were not knocking down the door to me, saying, hey, come be an intern here or come be a summer. And so actually to go back to my uncle, he had always said to me that some of the best lawyers he ever worked with had been prosecutors, criminal prosecutors. And his thinking was, they throw you in the deep end. It's government. They're under resourced. You're going to get so many repetitions. And, they don't put you in like the murder courtroom on your first day. They put you in like the bar fight courtroom or somebody who stole a pack of gum. And so the stakes aren't insane. And so you go in there and you kind of fall down every day for, 2 years like I did. And you learn just a million lessons. And I remember leaving, and there was a judge that I practiced in front of. His name's Charles Weech, and my first year practicing, I thought, okay, this guy hates me, and I don't particularly like him. But when I decided to leave the prosecutor's office, I stopped by his chambers to let him know, and he said this was 2008, so we're talking 16 years ago, and it's clear as day to me. He said, I know I was hard on you. I'm not hard on every lawyer because I don't think every lawyer has what it takes to be great. I think you do. And I know I challenged you a lot, but the lawyer you're walking out of here as is, so much more accomplished and capable than the lawyer you came as. And so I hope someday you look back at this experience and you're grateful. And I kind of remember thinking like, you don't know me, like, come on. And not that I didn't say that to him. I was like, oh, thanks so much. And yeah, I am grateful. I mean, he and I have not connected. He's retired. But absolutely the lawyer I am today, and that's not just him. I could probably give you a dozen stories about lawyers who have shaped who I am and how I practice and the way I approach my job. So yeah, after prosecuting for almost 2 years and trying more than 100 cases, countless jury trials and bench trials, again, making thousands of mistakes, I said, okay, I want to do this on a bigger stage with higher stakes. And I ended up joining the Chicago law firm of Freeborn and Peters in 2008 as an associate in their litigation practice group. And I was there at Freeborn for almost 11 years. Had a lot of mentors there. who taught me a lot of different things about preparation, how to handle clients, not handle clients, how to provide counsel to clients and to support them, you know, working with judges, how to handle opposing counsel, depositions. I mean, everything, all the tools that you need in the toolkit of a good litigator. And yeah, I really enjoyed that experience. And I think there's a version of my life where I stayed in law firms and was very happy. But to go back to my lesson from, my early days at DePaul, I kind of kept having this gnawing thing that was like, okay, I'm good at this, or pretty good at it. I have seen myself kind of ascend through the ranks of the associates. I ultimately made partner at Freeborn, but I kept thinking, okay, now am I here because this is comfortable? Am I here because, you know, it's lucrative, or am I here because this is where I want to be? And I think I could say the first two were true. The third one, I wasn't sure. And I kind of sat down, I want to say my first year as a partner, and I thought to myself, you know what? Like, I'm good at this, but is it what I'm supposed to be doing? Right? Kind of same thought process with numbers back in my DePaul days. And I realized that the one thing about litigating that I didn't love was that I always got brought in by the nature of what law firms do. Like when everything was, when the chips were down and everything had already kind of gone to hell, if I can say that on a
Right.
podcast. And you clean up and you do your job. But I remember thinking like, cleaning something up is not nearly as rewarding as preventing something from breaking in the first place. And so I kind of started thinking about what, prevention might look like. And that's what drew me in-house. And yeah, I went from Freeborn to a legal technology company called Elevate. I worked with some great lawyers in the Chicago area who really taught me about proactive thinking and a little bit of bucking the trend of law firms, which again, law firms are necessary and they're there for a reason. But I just didn't feel like that suited my particular desire to practice law. And so I spent a year and a half at Elevate kind of learning the ins and outs of in-house work. And then I took a job at a company called Truqua, where I was very happy. But shortly after I joined as their general counsel, the owners said, hey, IBM is trying to buy us and we're going to sell. I said, does IBM need a general counsel? It turns out they already had one. So they did not need me to be their general counsel. That was a joke, by the way. I assumed they did not need me. Um, so yeah, I ended up like syncing up with Infusion in the summer of 2020. And, I loved the concept of our software and our value proposition. And I spoke to a lot of leaders within the business during my interview process. And I just thought like, this is a really cool opportunity. And you kind of hear people who like get a seat on a rocket ship right before it takes off. And you're like, wow, like that would be great. And in hindsight, that is exactly what I did. And I got brought in as a deputy GC by my predecessor in the role of general counsel. And he said, look, we need to build out a law department because we're considering an IPO. And he said, I'd love you to come in and kind of be the architect of that. And so my first year was standing up a lot of processes and practices in areas where lawyers had not really been felt across our business. And then we systematically hired and we went public in October of 21. And then about a year later, my predecessor, who I mentioned, decided, he had been here for 8 years. He had gone on his journey. He was stepping away. And our CEO then asked me, would I want to assume the role of general counsel, which I did. So I've been in that role since November 1 of 2022. And saying that out loud is a little bit, shocking because it feels like I've been doing this for a week, but I also feel like I've been doing this my whole life.
Yeah, I mean, you've had just it's just really incredible. I think you have a career that many people could only wish for, given you've been in government and you were a law firm partner, and now you're a general counsel. You went through an IPO, and you were essentially your prior GC successor. And as we all know, not every deputy gets that opportunity. So I do have some follow-up questions about that. I mean, first of all, how did you make the transition in-house, and what was that transition like? Because a lot of law firm folks try to make that transition, and sometimes it it doesn't happen, or sometimes it takes many years. So how were you able to make that first in-house get that first in-house job?
Yeah, I think, I'll tell you, I did the very traditional, like any kind of mid-level in-house job that wouldn't require me to take a significant pay cut because again, you get to the level where I was in my partnership at Freeborn and I was making a very healthy salary and there was bonus and I had some
Sure.
business. And so you think, okay, well, I want to go over here and do this other thing, but litigators traditionally aren't viewed as like logical transitions into in-house work unless you're going to a company to manage litigation. And not a lot of companies have that need because not a lot of companies have that much litigation. It's usually outsourced, as I'm sure you
Right.
know. So for me, I tried the traditional, like I'm just going to apply for a lot of jobs, and I got to second, third interviews, and ultimately they would go with someone who had maybe more experience, from a corporate legal perspective, or IP work, or whatever the need was for the role. And so I looked at a lot of generalist roles. Those are the ones I got pretty far down the process path with, but I just kept falling short. And so I learned about Elevate, and it was a bit of a unique role because they needed someone to internally help develop software, from like, hey, we're building software for in-house lawyers and litigators at law firms. We need to understand what is like a good value proposition. So I went there to kind of do that with a third of my time, and the other two thirds I was used as like an outsourced, almost like an incremental in-house lawyer. And so I wasn't working for any of our clients. We had clients, and I would like handle small bits and pieces of their business. So I got a taste of what it would be like to be an in-house lawyer at 3 or 4 companies. Now that's a very non-traditional path, and I think a lot of lawyers, especially where I was, in part my partnership, would think, okay, this is a non-traditional role. If it's not what I think, it's probably more risk than reward. So I'm not really interested in, it wasn't even like a lateral step. I think people sometimes when I spoke to people about it, they viewed it as a step back. And you know what? It may have been, but, and I took a pay cut, but I thought, listen, I got to listen to my heart on this one, and I want to find a way to be happier. So if I have to take a step back and I can take a pay cut and not compromise, my ability to provide for my family, I think I'm going to give this a shot. And I was 40 at the time. I had just turned 40. And so I did it. And I'll be honest, it was scary. And there were days where I was like, interesting, like, how do I talk about this? But I always kind of had a general plan for what a ladder would look like, which was take that, do that for a couple of years, learn what it is to be an in-house lawyer, and then try to, parlay that into, an in-house role at a smaller company, and then use that as a stepping stone, and then go to a mid-sized company and use that as a stepping stone. So, it was a little more like I had tried the traditional path. I did not have success. And so I pivoted and I adjusted. And again, I had a general kind of vague understanding of what I thought that would look like, that journey, if successful. I could not have dreamt in my wildest dreams that I would end up, sitting where I am today. I'm incredibly grateful for that. But I think, at the end of the day, I trusted my ability to work hard, and I trusted that, you know, most companies are meritocracies. And I've been very fortunate to work with people who have supported me, who have helped me. I have an incredible team at Infusion that I would walk through fire for. And yeah, I've had a great CEO at Infusion who really values the contributions and the value that legal brings. And so he has been a huge proponent of myself and my team. And with every opportunity he brings me into, it's a chance for me to evolve and learn.
That's fantastic. And it sounds like you certainly had to take a healthy amount of risk yourself to get yourself to this point as well. And back to my earlier comment about how not every deputy general counsel gets to step into the GC role at the same company. Looking back, what were some of the factors you think that led your CEO to promote you and to feel very comfortable with having you at the top legal seat?
I think it's a great question. And he and our CEO at the time when I was asked to assume this role, is not our CEO anymore. He stepped away for I think a good year to spend time with family, and then he went to another company. I've spoken to him. He's a great guy. But I've never had the chance to sit down and say, hey, why me? I think when he first spoke to me and said, listen, your predecessor is going to be stepping away and he's going to take some time for himself. We'd love you to step in. I think what was implied to me was, everybody who kind of has a voice in this decision sees your work ethic. They see the value you bring. They see how much you care about this business. They see that you've worked to build this team. And, I guess logically, who better to lead this team than someone who was instrumental in building it? I also do think that, my diverse background gave him comfort because, the obvious thing to do would be go to a search firm and say, okay, we want to see 3 to 5, small cap, mid-level, mid-cap company general counsels, and we're going to bring in the best one. It was a bet to go grab a deputy GC who had been only a general counsel of a small private company. But I like to think that, the year and a half of work that I did and how I helped take us public and, just my reputation within the business as a leader maybe didn't even cause him to give it a second thought. And I was just kind of standing there waiting in the wings. But I never asked him. I wish I would have, and maybe if he and I ever reconnect, I will. But when he did so, I thought, okay, this seems logical. And by that point in my journey, and look, the role of deputy general counsel is very different than general counsel. You think about who your stakeholders are and your partners in the business. That's a whole other probably podcast episode or a book, right? And I think I was doing the things at deputy general counsel level where, thanks to my predecessor being willing to give me opportunities to succeed and stand out and always wanting to collaborate, I think I had more exposure to the board and to our executive leadership as a deputy general counsel than maybe most do in companies. And so I was a known quantity when that conversation had to happen. And again, I don't know what happened beforehand, if they had considered different paths, but when he came to me, if I recall correctly, his words were, you're the main obvious candidate. So if you'd like to do this job, we'd like to give it a try. And I said, of course I can do this job. And in my head, I was like, can I do this? Like, I guess we're going to find out. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's interesting. That was a great question. It's not something I really had thought about.
Well, I do hear time and again that exposure to the board and management is super important, especially for that first GC role. So having had that and having gained their confidence must have played a huge role. And so since joining Infusion, you experienced hypergrowth and you went through an IPO. Tell us about that experience and how you navigated the changes within such a short time frame.
I think that has been the most challenging part of my time at Infusion. The hypergrowth, the IPO, 1 year, 13 months from my start. And then, we went public in that window where, lots and lots of companies were going public in 2021. And, I remember talking with like outside advisors and people saying, me saying like, well, when is the right time for a company to go public? And they all had this kind of a same answer, which was, it's really company specific. It's a maturity issue. It's a revenue issue. It's a whole variety of factors. But, I'm confident we went public at the right time for our business. That being said, there's a lot of growing up you have to do as a public company, and there's so many considerations and aspects of especially legal operations and legal risk that as a private company you just don't have to deal with. I have 2 lawyers on my team who are primarily securities counsel. As a private company, obviously they're not needed. That said, as a public company, I thank my lucky stars every day that I have 2 just wonderful securities lawyers and that they're doing everything that they need to protect the business. But yeah, I think the amount of adjusting, I often thought when I was a young lawyer, friends of mine from law school were like, oh, I'm going to start my own firm. And I remember thinking, that sounds horrifying. I want to go somewhere that's established, that they have all the front office, back office, like payroll and benefits. I just want to do my job as a lawyer and then let somebody else worry about that stuff. And I just remember thinking like, I'm not an entrepreneurial person early in my career. And I remember joining Infusion and really loving building things, right? You have your companies, like your legacy companies, like I'll think of like a GE, for example, and not that they're not innovating, they obviously are, but they have their legal teams and they have their lawyers who are specialists. And I'm sure those lawyers are doing very similar business as usual rote type things on a daily basis. That could not be further from my job. Every single day is a roller coaster in the best possible sense. And so I find myself being entrepreneurial and building and trying to think about being proactive. And so that has been the exciting part. I mentioned earlier, Infusion seemed to me like a rocket ship. It has been, from a growth perspective, from a evolution of the business perspective, but also just from a pure excitement perspective, because, one of the things about working at a law firm and being a litigator is after a couple years of doing that, if you're paying attention, yeah, the subject matter changes, but the basic steps in a litigation are very repeatable. And that's because they're driven by rules of procedure. You know, there is very little that's predictable about my time at Infusion. And I don't say that to imply that Infusion is volatile or like an unhealthy business, but just given where we are in our growth, there's a lot of things we're figuring out about ourselves. And I'm just really excited and grateful that I get to be in those rooms at a high level, having conversations about what's the right way to do it. And then having the respect of our executive leadership team, my colleagues on that, and the board to, they look to me and they say, hey, you're an important voice in this conversation. You have the ability to influence, what we do for our clients, how our employees are treated, our investors. And that's not a responsibility I take lightly. And, if I was a, mid-level lawyer at IBM, and again, no offense to anybody at IBM, including my brother who's there, that's a very different day. So I love the environment here. There's some days where it's scary, but more often than not, it's excitement.
It's great. Always keeps you on your toes. And I think you had mentioned the public company piece being challenging. What would you say is the most challenging aspect of being a general counsel now?
So I think the most challenging part is, you know, I think I'm okay to say this as an 18-year lawyer. I feel like the rate with which technology is changing and the number of novel questions that are coming up on a consistent basis. And the obvious headline there is AI, but I feel like there's so many other
Hmm.
things. Businesses are merging and acquisitions happening, and there are these just mega conglomerate companies, and they're all over the world. And I think about an Infusion, which from our time as a company, quote unquote, like alive, we're young, but we're also in 8 countries, and there's 8 bodies of law, and there's eight, and that's just from a country perspective. You think about the US as a federal law, but you also think state level. We're in, many, many states. Um, we're a team of 9 lawyers. And so to me, just the ever evolving, changing landscape legislatively, having a lean team, you really have to be efficient and effective in picking your spots as far as like how you want to spend your day, because you could spend your day doing any number of things. But I think it's incumbent on myself and my team to figure out what's the highest ROI, what's the highest and best use of my time as a lawyer. And so to me, the challenge is that on the backside, resource allocation, time management. But on the front side, from a legal perspective, it's just, you know, the world is changing at a faster rate than ever before. And, the law changes with it or as a reaction to that. And just making sure that we are constantly on top of understanding what laws are changing, why are they changing, what does that mean for us. We have offices in London, and we have offices in Dublin, we have offices in India and Hong Kong and Singapore and Australia, Brazil. We're in many places, and um, there's just a lot of law and there's a lot of changes to those laws. And so staying on top of that's a full-time job. And then you think about also trying to be proactive and think, a concept that I refer to as upstream, based on a book I've read. And you want to go build things that, hey, next time we come through this in a year, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so um, I would say, that's a little bit of and that answer is kind of a little all over the place, but I would say just the rate of changing of the world driven by technology, the changing of laws and legislation with that, and then balancing that through the lens of a relatively young public company that has to make sure that it's always doing everything it needs to be in compliance and, and beholden to the various applicable laws.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a lot for, as you mentioned, a lean team to take on. How how are you able to stay on top of the ever-changing laws? Is it a matter of leveraging outside counsel? Do you just do a lot of reading on your own? Like, what do you do to tackle this issue?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's all of those things and probably other things that I aren't coming to mind at this moment. But yeah, I mean, we do leverage outside counsel. Obviously, outside counsel can be expensive if not, if not used properly. So that's something that that's what I'm responsible for as the leader of our team and our function. But we absolutely pick up the phone when we're dealing with something novel. We were on a call earlier today with an outside counsel on something that, none of the nine of us really had a sense. We had a general sense. We like kicked the tires on a few issues, but we thought, you know what, this is high enough stakes to where we should just get on the phone with an outside firm. Um, the other part is education and evolution as a lawyer. So, I ask my team, and when I say ask, I mean they're all already built this way because the team is incredible, but have a growth mindset. Always be willing to learn, just get a little bit better every day at what you do. Try to learn things that are ancillary to your specific, workflow. And yeah, and the other thing is too, I just think, I look at my team, and when a novel issue comes in, I'm not like searching for someone to grab it. Like three, four people are raising their hand saying, "Hey, I'll take a look at this." And I'll tell you this very confidently. That's not because they're not busy. It's not for a lack of work. In fact, they're all very busy given the size of our team, but it is a desire to continue to bring value to the business and to just do good work. These are people who care about their reputation, they care about the business, they care about our team. And so there's not one kind of silver bullet that we use to solve for that. It's a combination of being efficient, knowing our blind spots, educating ourselves, collaborating, utilizing outside counsel, trying to use technology and things like that where we can. Um, but it's an ongoing process, and I don't think we'll ever solve it because again, the law will constantly be changing with the world.
Absolutely. And from what I've heard from other GCs, this is a prevalent uh, problem or to tackle. It was, and you mentioned early on, to quote your uncle, there are a lot of lawyers out there, but not necessarily a lot of good lawyers. So, given your experience and where you are now, what would you consider a good lawyer?
Yeah, another great question, Lena. It's funny, in with the benefit of 18 years of practice, and maybe I've just been very fortunate, but whether in government, whether in law firm practice, whether in house, um, I think there are a lot of good lawyers, and I think there are some great lawyers. And so if it's okay, I'll slightly amend your question and I'll
Sure.
answer what I think makes a great lawyer. It's a few things, right? And it depends on what kind of lawyer you are. If you are the, Midwest's foremost expert on antitrust law, like what makes you great is the fact that you probably know everything there is to know about antitrust law. And if you're a criminal prosecutor, knowing procedure, knowing how to deal with victims and witnesses. But I think the thread that runs through, regardless of your function or your practice, is a desire to continue to do the right thing and to kind of set aside ego because lawyers have a tremendous amount of influence and some lawyers have a tremendous amount of power, and humans are humans. I think that can go to people's heads and they can be like, oh, well, I'm the smartest person and I know better than you. And that can really go some ugly places I've seen. And I've seen when it goes kind of unchecked and that ego monster has their hands on the wheel. But the lawyers who I have found to be the most effective are those that are intelligent for sure, but also really understand what makes people tick and how to understand and get inside of a conflict and apply common sense. And I think, being practical, being a good communicator, and by that I don't just mean being an orator or someone who's good with words. I mean somebody who is an active listener and is unable to step into a situation and recognize I'm likely not the smartest person in this conversation. And even if I am, I want to walk into it like I'm not because there's absolutely things for me to learn that I don't know. And when you're representing a company as an in-house lawyer or a client as a law firm or the state as a prosecutor, the more you know, the more effective and capable you'll be. So, it's probably sounds a little cliche and maybe I'm getting softer in my old age, but, I think being humble, being kind, having a growth mindset, wanting to continue to learn and wanting to continue to just better yourself, obviously combined with like, the basics of you're intelligent, you understand the law, you understand outcomes and how to understand and analyze risk. But those are the threads for me from whether I was a brand new lawyer in the state's attorney's office and there were, grizzled veterans, I saw them. I thought, hey, how does somebody do this for 30 years? And those are the characteristics I saw. And in my law firm days, those are the characteristics I saw in the lawyers that I wanted to emulate and the ones I wanted to learn from. And, even in my in-house practice, I've met so many lawyers, and now I'm even exposed to more non-lawyers who have those characteristics. And those are people who are leaders and executives. And so, I like to think, I hope, 18 years in, I demonstrate some of that, because I would love to be an example, for younger lawyers who are up and coming, and they say, hey, look, somebody like a Matt who's like a good guy and he treats people well and he approaches his job, from a place of being humble and wanting to grow, but he's still effective and he's been successful. I think any profession, but really just human beings generally, like we just need more people like that who are kind and humble. And again, I know that's not like a scientific or sexy answer, but again, I think about that stuff sometimes, and I just think you work hard, you keep your head down, you treat people the right way. There's no limits.
I wholeheartedly agree, Matt. That's it. As you mentioned, it's not necessarily just what makes a good or great lawyer, but in any profession, these are traits or characteristics that we can all remind ourselves to work towards. And finally, I know you have a family and you have 3 kids. So what do you do to decompress? Does it involve playing with them or spending time with family?
Yeah, I think primarily, just because of how much I work. My the main thing I like to do in my free time is spend time with my kids, because I'm constantly balancing that, live to work, work to live proposition. And, I see time flying. My oldest is 14, and he starts high school in like 2 months, and I can't even believe it. And yeah, I look at opportunities to sit down with them and meet them, kind of at their level where they live. And that might be playing video games with my son who's 14, or, watching the Taylor Swift Eras concert tour on Disney Plus with my 10-year-old, or taking my 5-year-old to the park for the 1000th time, and just thinking like, really, like, you want to do that again? But, just watching them in their element, smiling, learning, experiencing life, it recharges me, and it reminds me, even on my hardest days, and I love my job, but there are hard days. It reminds me of why I'm doing this, to provide for my family, to give them a better future. And we're recording this. I'm not sure when it'll be published, but Father's Day is in 2 days. And
Yeah.
I often think about myself, I don't consider myself a lawyer. I am. That's my job. But if I sat down to describe myself, in 10 words, I don't know that lawyer would be one of them. And that's not because I don't enjoy being a lawyer, that I'm not proud to be one, but I'm a dad, I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a husband, I'm a number of different things. And reminding myself that, there's no job more important to me than to be the dad to my kids and to protect them and to teach them and help them grow up into, well-balanced people who can contribute to society, and take care of themselves. Like, that is absolutely the most important job. And so to me, it's just a no-brainer. If I get done with work early on a Thursday, or, a Saturday happens to be totally clear of activities, all I want to do is grab my kids and just go do something, and watch them laugh and enjoy life.
That sounds sublime. Has any of them voiced a desire to become a lawyer when they grow up?
They they have not. I think my favorite, the best I can give you, and this isn't the answer to that question, but my 10-year-old daughter, when she was, very young and learning to speak, she thought I was a warrior when I would say lawyer. And I thought for a while she thought I was a worrier, which I am, like any good lawyer worries. But she thought I was a warrior, Warrior. And, I love that. Her going to
Mm.
school being like, my dad's a warrior. I sound, incredibly tough and imposing. But I've talked to them about it, more my 14 and 10-year-old than my 5-year-old. I mean, she knows what I do, but, my son and daughter will ask questions. I work from home a lot, so they'll come in my office and they see me looking at my 3 monitors, and, they're like, what are you doing? And, obviously I have to maintain privilege, so I can only tell them so much. But yeah, I think they're interested in it, and if they ever did come to me and say, hey, I really am thinking about law school, I'd like to think I would answer them similarly to how my uncle answered me, 25 years ago. Whatever you're going to do, make sure it's something that makes you happy. And even if there's a lot of people doing that, go be great at it, because all that's going to do is make the world better.
I feel like our conversation has come full circle, kind of starting and ending with your uncle. So that was wonderful. And Thank you so much for your time, Matt. I really enjoyed learning more about you and about your family, and about your career journey to becoming a general counsel. So thanks again for your time, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Absolutely, Lena. Thank you for having me. And to those of your listeners who stuck around this long, thank you for listening. And, you know, just a quick, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm really focusing at this point in my career on helping younger lawyers kind of find their way and figure out what lights their fire. So anyone who's listening who wants to have a conversation about maybe an unorthodox journey in their career, feel free to reach out. I would love to chat.
Thanks so much, Matt. That's awesome.
Thanks, Lena.
Thanks so much for listening to GC's in the House. I hope you enjoyed this episode and will join me next time for an in-depth discussion with another general counsel. I welcome your feedback and recommendations for guests. You can reach me at lguo@mlaglobal.com. Please also reach out if you have any questions or comments about today's episode. Until next time.